Hello, my name is Ladejane Perkins, and in this presentation, we're going to be talking about China's century of humiliation. So, you may be wondering what that is, and so what this century of humiliation is, it was between 1839 and 1949, and China experienced many downfalls during this time period, including the First and Second Opium Wars, numerous military defeats, social instability and unrest, unequal treaties, loss of sovereignty to foreign powers, rebellions, and other events that heavily influenced China's view on nationalism, military modernization, and how to approach foreign powers. So the beginning of the century of humiliation starts with the First Opium War, and that took place between 1839 and 1842. The Opium War was China's attempt to suppress opium trade in their country. British traders primarily have been illegally exporting opium from India to China, which had a terrible impact on their economy. Because of addiction running rampant in China, it disrupted China's economy and their society because the working class became unproductive. So, in spring of 1839, the Chinese government destroyed an estimated 1,400 tons of opium being stored in a warehouse in Canton by British merchants. So subsequently, the British acted terrible. Drunk sailors killed Chinese villagers, and to add to that, the government did not turn them over to Chinese courts, so they went free, and they went without consequences. British warships also destroyed the Chinese blockade of their Pearl River estuary. They attacked and occupied Hong Kong and then captured Nanking in 1842. The First Opium War came to an end on August 29, 1842, when China and Britain signed the Treaty of Nanking. This was a very unequal treaty, however. China had to pay Britain large indemnities, give them Hong Kong, and increase the amount of ports available to British traders. Additionally, British citizens on Chinese land were given extraterritoriality, so this meant that they did not have to abide by Chinese laws. Other European powers decided to hop on the bandwagon and force China into signing unfair treaties, and these foreign powers include France, Russia, and Japan. Following the First Opium War is the Second Opium War, which took place between 1856 and 1860. This came about because Britain wanted more trading rights in China, and they were also unsatisfied with how the Qing dynasty were adhering to the conditions of their treaty. They felt as though they were not adhering enough. So, British warships sailed up the Pearl River estuary and raided Canton, causing fights to break out between Chinese and British troops. Because of this, trading ceases, and in December 1856, China burns foreign trading warehouses. France then joins Britain. They capture Canton and replace their governor. In May of 1858, British troops reached Tianjin and forced negotiations. So a month later, in June of 1858, the negotiations of the Tianjin treaties included providing residence to foreign political officials, opening new ports to Western trade and residents, foreigners now having the right to travel in China's interiors, and then later in the year, legalizing opium importation. In June of 1859, Britain returns to Beijing with France to try and ratify these treaties, but China refuses, which causes them to fight even more. And then a year later, in August of 1860, British and French warships destroyed forts, captured Beijing, and burned the Emperor's Summer Palace. During the Beijing Convention, China agrees to adhere to the treaties of Tianjin and ceded more land to Britain. So as we can see from just these first two opium wars, China has been treated very unfairly by foreign powers, and they continuously lose their land. which gets worse as the century progresses. The next thing we'll talk about is the First Sino-Japanese War, which took place between 1894 and 1895. This was a conflict over control of Korea and East Asian influence because both China and Japan wanted Korea as it gave access to trade routes and markets. China lost this war, ending their tributary system and also causing them to lose their closest tributary state, which means that Taiwan became a Japanese colony. China then has to pay large indemnities to Japan. Japan replaces China as an East Asian power. And because of all these losses, China is taken aback and it propels them to reform their military. This loss greatly exposed the weaknesses in China's traditional systems. The next event that we will talk about is the Taiping Rebellion. This was an internal rebellion that highlights the fact that internal strife pushes people to rebel. It lasted 14 years, starting in 1850 and ending in 1869. The rebellion was put into motion when Hong Xiuquan became delusional after failing China's civil service exams many times. He went around preaching and gained followers by calling for an end to many of the issues that plagued China. Him and his estimated 40,000 followers formed the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace or Harmony, also known as Taiping, and Xiuquan declared himself king. They made their way to central China, and with their strong army and following, they controlled over 1/3 of the country. It took China's government over a decade and millions of dollars to suppress them. Historians estimate that over 20 million people died during this rebellion. China also fought against France in the Sino-French War from 1884 to 1885. This war was a conflict over control over Vietnam. It ended with the signing of the Treaty of Tianjin. As a result, China lost control over Vietnam and also lost it as a tributary state. This loss further lessens China's sphere of influence in East Asia. On to the Boxer Rebellion. This conflict lasted from 1899 to 1901. The Boxers, called that because Westerners thought their martial arts style looked like shadowboxing, were a Chinese organization officially named the Society of the Righteous and Harmonious Fists. They were anti-foreign, anti-Christian, and imperialist. This group killed foreigners and Chinese Christians, and they also destroyed foreign property. The open door policy that gave Americans and Europeans influence over Chinese trade was a catalyst for the rebellion. The Boxers blamed their poor living conditions on European colonization. On June 21, 1900, Empress Dowager Cixi declared war on foreign nations with diplomatic ties in China. Following this, on August 14th, Austria-Hungary, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States arrived in China to capture Beijing and rescue foreigners and Chinese Christians. They formed what is known as the Eight-Nation Alliance. The rebellion ended with the signing of the Boxer Protocol on September 7, 1901. The terms of this agreement weakened the Qing dynasty as they had to pay reparations to foreign nations and foreign troops were now stationed in Beijing, among other unfair stipulations. The 1911 revolution lasted 1 year, but in this short amount of time, China had many losses. They had constant losses of land and control over territory, as well as internal frustrations that further declined the Qing dynasty. In the same breath, this revolution also influenced nationalism and revolution. Chinese citizens overseas pushed for either widespread reform or revolution. This results in the emergence of the Revolutionary Alliance. The leaders of this alliance were Kang Youwei, Lung Qichao, and Sun Yat-sen. They wanted to replace the Qing dynasty with a republican government. In the autumn of 1911, imperial rule in China ended, and the Republic of China was established. The 21 demands were a list of demands that Japan presented to China that would heavily increase Japanese rule over Chinese territory and economy. The list was split into 5 groups, with group number 5 being the worst of them all. Group number 5 required China to have Japanese advisors that would control the military, government, and economy. Japan threatened China to keep these demands secret in order to avoid uproar. The Chinese government outright refused group number 5, and after 25 rounds of negotiation, the Chinese president told his political advisor to leak the demands in hopes of garnering support from Europe and the US. The US said it would not recognize these demands as they infringe upon the open door policy. After more negotiating, the Japanese government agreed to drop Group 5, and the terms of the treaty were accepted on May 9, 1915. The acceptance of this treaty weakened the Chinese president's credibility as a leader, bringing quote-unquote terrible shame to China. May 9th is now recognized as China's National Humiliation Day. 4 years later, at the Paris Peace Conference, Chinese delegates wanted the region of Qingdao occupied by Germany to be returned. Instead, the Treaty of Versailles made it to where Germany gave the land to Japan in exchange for military aid, aligning with the secret agreement made 2 years prior. This sparks mass protest, mainly among university students, known as the May 4th movement. Because of their disdain with how the Chinese government was handling things, the students burned the Minister of Communications' house and assaulted China's minister to Japan. They also boycotted Japanese goods and merchants, and workers in Shanghai went on strike for weekend support. The May 4th movement resulted in the dismissal of 3 pro-Japanese officials, the resignation of the cabinet, and China's refusal to sign the treaty. This movement was another major catalyst for widespread reform and the decline of traditional systems, as well as the start of the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Civil War was between the Chinese Communist Party and the Nationalist Party over control of China. The war ended when Communist leader Mao Zedong declared the People's Republic of China on October 1, 1949. This caused the United States to cut diplomatic ties for decades. An estimated 5 million deaths among civilians resulted from the war, as well as social upheaval and political instability. On September 18, 1931, an explosive destroyed a portion of a railway track owned by Japan near Mukden. The Japanese blamed Chinese nationalists for this and invaded Manchuria. It is speculated that the bomb was planted by the Japanese army to instigate military action. The Japanese army overruns the area, and they then attack Shanghai due to their success in Manchuria. The US issued the Stimson Doctrine, but it is ineffective against the Chinese. This invasion fueled anti-Japanese sentiment and resentment. The Second War between China and Japan, lasting from 1937 to 1945, was a major part of World War II. Despite it being a Chinese victory, half of China was ruined. Japan surrendered this war due to being bombed by the United States. This war showed China that their industries and military was severely underdeveloped compared to Japan's. Japan committed many atrocities in China during the Second Sino-Japanese War. The massacre of Nanking is something that will forever be remembered by China's citizens. Japanese troops massacred 300,000 people, mostly civilians, as well as tortured, murdered, and raped them. Women were taken and forced to be sex slaves, called comfort women. Unit 731 also displays the horrors that Chinese people experienced at the hands of the Japanese. Chinese prisoners were subjected to harmful experiments in chemical warfare. On top of the previous thing China went through, this left them politically unstable, with an exhausted economy and great suffering. China's century of humiliation ended with the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949, led by Mao Zedong. This ended years of foreign influence and internal fragmentation. Past unequal treaties were ended or renegotiated, and China developed nuclear capability and further modernized its military. The People's Republic of China allowed for China to establish itself as a nation capable of standing with Western powers. Other Chinese leaders have declared other dates as the end of their humiliation, but it is generally accepted that the start of the Republic ended much of the exploitation the country was subject to. From here, China was able to rebuild itself and become the country it is today. There were and still are hardships among Chinese citizens, so that's not to say that the end of the century of humiliation made living in China perfect. The constant and overlapping injustices that China experienced continues to impact Chinese citizens in many ways and has heavily influenced the Chinese government's decisions. Thank you for listening.